The Grand Meridian Hotel's lobby was alive with the soft clink of glasses and the murmur of elite conversations, but none of that could drown out the faint, yet distinct, voice of a young girl who stood at the entrance. "Could I play for something to eat?" The question, innocent yet stark in its simplicity, cut through the air like a dagger. Ella Harper, a 12-year-old girl dressed in clothes that looked too big for her slight frame, stood there, her large, hopeful eyes locked onto the grand Steinway piano that gleamed beneath the chandeliers. Her worn backpack was clutched tightly in her hands like a shield, its edges frayed from years of use. She was a stark contrast to the guests surrounding her, dressed in their designer gowns and expensive suits. The sophisticated chatter faltered, a ripple of surprise sweeping through the crowd. A woman with platinum blonde hair, her face drawn in a mixture of confusion and disdain, whispered to her companion, "How did that girl get in here? Someone should get security." The comment was like a quiet wave that spread through the room, making the guests turn their heads. Ella's arrival had interrupted what was supposed to be a glittering charity event, a gala to raise funds for disadvantaged youth. Ironically, the very cause they were celebrating seemed to mock Ella, who had spent the past several nights rotating through different shelters. She had passed the hotel earlier and overheard someone mention the event, prompting an inexplicable urge to enter. She had no invitation, no place here, but the piano, it called to her. Patricia King, the organizer of the event, strolled over with slow, deliberate steps. At 45, Patricia was the embodiment of the city's high society, wealthy, refined, and convinced of her moral superiority. "Sweetheart," she said with a smile that barely masked her condescension, "this is a private event. There's a McDonald's 2 blocks from here. Perhaps you can grab a bite there." Ella's response was unexpected. Her voice, initially timid, gathered strength. "I just want to play one song, in exchange for a plate of food." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a person with more resolve than her appearance suggested. The crowd began to laugh, the kind of laughter that made the air crackle with discomfort. "She thinks she can play the piano," sneered one of the men, his voice thick with mockery. "How adorable. Poor thing, probably doesn't even know how to find middle C." Another woman chimed in, shaking her head as if pitying the child. But Ella didn't flinch. Her posture remained upright, dignified. There was an air about her that was too calm, too assured for someone in her situation. She looked neither down nor sideways, as though she knew something none of them could understand. Dr. Samuel Grant, a world-renowned pianist who had judged countless competitions, was watching from the back of the room. Something in Ella's gaze, a look of reverence as she studied the piano, caught his attention. There was something there, something beyond her age, beyond her situation. She wasn't just looking at the instrument. She was connected to it. He leaned toward Patricia. "Perhaps we should let her play. Isn't that why we're here? To support young talent." Patricia's laugh was cold and dismissive. "Samuel, really? Do you honestly think a child like her has had access to any sort of real music education?" She smiled, her gaze filled with superiority. "Let's be real here." But Dr. Grant wasn't convinced. There was more to this girl than met the eye, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing something extraordinary. What none of the guests knew was that Ella's request was not as naive as it appeared. Her story, layered with heartache and resilience, was far more intricate. Her grandmother, Clara Harper, had been a celebrated classical pianist in her day, her fingers dancing across the keys with such mastery that even seasoned concert pianists would stop to listen. But the world had not been kind to Clara, not because of her talent, but because of her race. Despite her immense abilities, Clara was repeatedly rejected from prestigious conservatories simply because she was black. She had channeled her pain and her passion into teaching, transforming her small apartment into a sanctuary for young children eager to learn the language of music. Ella had spent her early childhood under her grandmother's tutelage, her fingers finding comfort in the familiar scales and melodies. Music wasn't just a subject, it was a conversation, a way of expressing things words could never capture. Clara had taught Ella not just the mechanics of the piano, but the very essence of what it meant to be an artist. But when Clara died unexpectedly, Ella was torn from the only home she had ever known and thrust into the foster system. The shelters, the uncertainty, the nights spent alone. Music was the only thing that kept her grounded. As Ella stood there, facing the crowd, her mind, was flooded with memories of her grandmother. The soft touch of Clara's hands as she guided Ella's tiny fingers across the keys, the lessons about resilience that went beyond music, the way Clara had turned her own pain into beautiful compositions. Ella's fingers twitched, as though playing an invisible melody. It was a habit she had developed in the hardest moments, playing music in her mind to calm her nerves. Patricia's voice broke through her thoughts. "Fine, you can play, but only under certain conditions." She smirked, enjoying the drama she was about to create. "First, you'll play only one song, and we will choose it. Second, if you can play it decently, and that's a big if, I'll buy you a full dinner. But if you fail, you'll leave this place immediately and never return." The crowd's laughter intensified. It was clear that they didn't expect her to last 5 seconds at the piano. But Ella didn't flinch. Her heart beat steady, her posture as strong as it had ever been. She had already faced worse, much worse, than this. And she had learned that music was her only way to stand tall when the world tried to break her. "I accept," she said quietly, but with such conviction that the room seemed to quiet. Dr. Grant, watching intently, felt a curious thrill building in his chest. There was something special about this child, something that couldn't be ignored. Patricia, eager to see this unfold, turned to a man standing nearby, James Morrison. A local pianist known more for his charm than his skills, he was the perfect accomplice for her cruel game. "James, darling," Patricia said with a sharp smile. "What do you think? What should we make our young pianist play?" James, a smirk playing on his lips, leaned forward. "How about Beethoven's Für Elise?" he suggested with a knowing look. It was the perfect choice. To the untrained ear, it seemed simple. It was often one of the first pieces many amateur pianists tackled. But to perform it well, truly well, required finesse, precision, and experience. It would either expose Ella's ignorance, or it would reveal her mastery. Either way, it would be entertaining. Patricia, enjoying the spectacle unfolding before her, clapped her hands together. "Perfect. A song every child who's ever taken a piano lesson knows. There's no excuse for failure here." Ella nodded. She was ready. As Ella approached the piano, the crowd shifted in anticipation, eager to see the little girl humiliate herself. But as she adjusted the bench, precisely, carefully, the whispers of skepticism faltered. Dr. Grant's eyes narrowed. Those weren't the movements of a beginner. Ella settled herself on the bench, her fingers hovering just above the keys. She wasn't just sitting to play. She was preparing herself to return to a familiar world, one where her grandmother's spirit seemed to linger in the air. The way she held her hands, the way she positioned herself, it was all too practiced, too natural for someone who had no formal training. A slight murmur rippled through the crowd as they began to notice it too. Something was different about this girl. She wasn't out of place. She belonged at the piano. With a deep breath, Ella's fingers touched the keys, and the first note rang out. It was perfect, clear, resonant, and full of purpose. The crowd's laughter died. Some looked at each other, confused, uncertain of what they were hearing. But Ella was lost in the music now, every note flowing naturally from her hands. Dr. Grant, captivated, watched her hands glide over the keys with an artistry that was far beyond her years. The phrasing was exquisite. The way she controlled the dynamics, every crescendo, every diminuendo, was as if she had lived and breathed the piece for years. As Ella moved into the main melody, the transformation was complete. The audience, who had initially believed they were watching a performance designed to humiliate a child, was now witnessing something completely different. It wasn't just a child playing the piano. It was an artist, a prodigy. Each note was perfect, every pause between them meaningful. She wasn't just playing Für Elise. She was interpreting it, transforming it into something deeper, more profound. Patricia's face tightened. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't part of her plan. But it was happening. And in that moment, everything shifted. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Even the waitstaff, who had been moving in and out, paused in their tracks, unable to look away. Ella's fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, navigating complex passages with a grace that only years of dedicated practice could produce. Dr. Grant could hardly believe what he was hearing. Every note she played, every subtle dynamic shift, spoke of a depth of musical understanding that could not be faked. This was no simple child. Ella had a command of the piano that many professional pianists would envy. The final chords of Fur Elise echoed through the room, and the silence that followed was profound. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the world had stopped turning. Then, one by one, the applause started. It was hesitant at first, then grew louder, more insistent. Dr. Grant stood first, his hands coming together in an applause filled with awe and respect. Slowly, others joined in, some uncertain, some bewildered, but all moved by the extraordinary performance they had just witnessed. Patricia stood frozen, her face pale. The moment she had hoped would showcase her moral superiority had backfired completely. Instead of humiliating a vulnerable child, she had just witnessed a performance that would forever change how they all viewed talent and privilege. Ella remained seated, her hands resting lightly on the keys as the applause washed over her. She wasn't just playing the piano anymore. She had shown everyone in that room that talent, dignity, and greatness were not determined by appearance, race, or social standing. It was at that moment that Dr. Grant approached Ella, his face filled with both admiration and curiosity. "My dear," he said softly, "may I ask where you studied? Your teacher must be extraordinary." Ella met his gaze with a calm certainty, her eyes reflecting the deep well of pain and wisdom she had accumulated over the years. "My grandmother taught me," she said simply. "She said that music was the one thing no one could ever take away from me." Dr. Grant's breath caught. Clara Harper. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Clara Harper had been one of the greatest pianists this country had ever seen, yet she had been denied access to the institutions she deserved to be a part of because of her race. Instead, she had channeled her energy into teaching, training children like Ella who had the potential to change the world. Victoria, still processing the turn of events, scoffed. "What are you talking about, Robert? Who is Clara Harper?" Dr. Grant's response was heavy with emotion. Clara Harper was a legend. A virtuoso who was systematically excluded from conservatories and concert halls because of her race. She became one of the most respected private teachers in the country, though the world never knew the full extent of her genius. Victoria's face turned a shade of crimson. She had just tried to humiliate a child who was not only the granddaughter of a music legend, but a prodigy in her own right. Ella, having made her point, stood up from the piano. Her eyes locked onto Victoria, and in that moment, all traces of meekness vanished. "Miss King," she said, her voice calm yet powerful, "you are right about one thing. I shouldn't be here tonight. I should be at Carnegie Hall, where I have a recital scheduled next week." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The room went deathly silent as the reality of the situation began to settle in. Ella's gaze remained unwavering as she continued. "My name is Ella Harper. I'm the youngest classical pianist ever accepted into the Juilliard School's Young Artist Program. I am also the national champion for under-15s in classical piano." The crowd gasped. "I am here tonight not because I need food or money," Ella continued, "but because I've been documenting this event for a PBS special. This entire evening has been filmed." The silence in the room was deafening. The chaos that followed was swift and palpable. Victoria's face turned pale as the truth unfolded. Ella had been filming this event from the very start, capturing the prejudices and elitism that had been on full display. Ella smiled softly, almost sadly. "The first part of the documentary will focus on how people like you dismiss talent based on superficial appearances. The second part will show how you react when true artistry comes from unexpected places." Dr. Grant, his admiration for Ella growing, nodded. "You've done something few could ever do. You've exposed the real truth." The crowd began to murmur, some pulling out their phones to check tickets, realizing they had unknowingly signed consent forms for filming. Victoria, flustered and desperate, tried to dismiss the situation. "This isn't legal. You can't film us like this. It's an invasion of privacy." Ella, calm and composed, merely nodded. "Actually, Miss King, you signed releases when you entered. It's all in the fine print." The room was filled with nervous whispers. Some people were already trying to find hidden cameras. "I've filmed 12 similar events," Ella continued. "Every time it's the same. People who claim to value art and culture, but who dismiss talent based on how a person looks." Victoria's face twisted with disbelief. "You've been filming us?" "All along." Ella nodded, her voice steady. "Yes. And tomorrow, the world will see what happened here tonight." The documentary exploded in popularity, going viral across social media. Within days, Victoria Sterling's reputation was in tatters. Her company, once a thriving event planning empire, lost all its major clients, and her name became synonymous with elitism and prejudice. Ella, on the other hand, found herself on the national stage. She had just exposed a hidden truth, the reality of how talent and potential were often dismissed because of bias and assumptions. 6 months later, as Ella Harper stepped out of a limousine in front of Carnegie Hall, dressed in a gorgeous concert gown, the world had changed for her. Her debut performance was a sold-out event. And as for Victoria Sterling, she had been forced to face the consequences of her actions. Once a high society darling, she was now working as a junior associate at a small law firm, her career irreparably damaged.